You're listening to Scholé Sisters, episode number 69. Welcome to Scholé Sisters, the podcast for the classical homeschooling mama who seeks to learn and grow while she's helping her children learn and grow. Scholé Sisters is a casual conversation about topics that matter to those of us in the trenches of classical homeschooling who yearn for something more than just checking boxes and getting it all done. I'm your host, Brandy Venzel. You can find me at Afterthoughts. That's where you'll find my thoughts on educational philosophy and homeschooling, as well as my Charlotte Mason study guides and workshops. My co-host today is Misty Winkler. Misty is a second-generation homeschooler with 5 kids and too many projects. With her blog, podcast, and membership, she helps you organize your attitude so you can organize your life. Find her over at simplyconvivial.com. Our special guest today is Renee Shepard. Renee has been married for 14 years. She and her husband, who were both homeschooled, are now homeschooling their 6 children. She is currently finishing her graduate degree in Christian Classical Studies at New St. Andrews College, where her favorite things to study are theology, Latin, and literature. Quarantine got you down? It's not too late to check out our 30, 60, 90 planning session from last weekend. Just go to scolesisters.com/30-60-90 and register. This will send you the planning pages and the replay to watch. We'll help pull you out of your slump so that you are faithful and fruitful during these admittedly weird times. Today's episode is a follow-up to an episode we did last year called Someone Stole My Socrates. Misty, Renee, and I are discussing a work by Plato called Gorgias. I like to call it gorgeous. Whatever you call it, it's a Socratic dialogue. We decided that if we want to know what Socratic discussion is all about, we should go straight to the source. It's great fun. And so, without further ado, let's get to it. Let's start off with our Scholé every day. And Misty, I'll have you start us. If you don't mind.
Okay.
Remember to say your name.
Hi, I'm Misty Winkler.
There you go.
And my Scholé every day today is one of my 5x5 challenge picks. One of my categories is history. And so this is my first history read in that.
Oh.
And it's A Short History of the World by J.M. Roberts. One of the criteria that I used when I picked my categories were books that I already have a collection of, topics I have collections of that I haven't actually read.
Yeah.
And I was looking at my shelf. Well, part of the problem is that we moved our bookshelves into the dining room. And so now every time at dinner, I'm staring at my bookshelves and I feel angst and guilt. I'm like, really? I want to read you. No, I want to read you too. And I will read you someday.
Is this negatively affecting your digestion? I'm just wondering.
I should just drink more kombucha. There you go. So anyway, I have several books that are all short histories of the world or Europe or, there was kind of this collection. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to read those. So they're not just history books. They are all shorter surveys, although one of them is Modern Times by Paul Johnson, which is in no way short. But they're all survey type books.
Yeah.
So anyway, this one, A Short History of the World by J.M. Roberts, actually had a bookmark in it that was about maybe more like 75 pages in. But I still started from the beginning because it was like 4 years ago that I started.
Mm.
And I forgot until I got about to the bookmark spot that at the time I was trying to read several history books simultaneously. So I was reading this one alongside listening to Susan Wise Bauer, History of the Ancient World.
Oh, yeah.
And I gave up on this guy because I liked Susan Wise Bauer's approach so much more.
Oh.
She even says at the beginning, history is the discussion of man. And so history doesn't actually start till we have written records. So that's where she starts her history. And he has like 80 pages of quote unquote prehistory, which is a whole bunch of speculation, and it must have been this, and it was this, when it's all just made up.
Right?
So you're really glad that you picked back up your reject book, is what you're saying?
I stuck with it this time through the prehistory, through his bad attitude about Old Testament history, where he's really resentful that the Bible seems to be fairly historic, but he obviously does not want to admit that. And I am now into the Byzantine. So
I'm trying to figure out why you bought this book.
It was on somebody's book list. I don't know. I bought it used for $3 at the local used bookstore. I mean, I think it is good to read books from different perspectives.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I'm going with it, especially since I have multiple books on this topic. I think it will. And I have read Susan Weiss Bauer's as far as her history set goes.
Right.
So it is interesting to compare and just kind of get that survey over and over again. You could also read this and start with, just skip the whole prehistoric and earliest civilizations. He has to admit that something was special and strange about Jesus, because that he changed the world, but there's nothing in his actual message or life, looking at it objectively, that is like world changing. So he clearly says something's up with Jesus, and I can't figure out why.
Something's up with Jesus. Awesome.
But he admits changed the world. So sometimes, you get a little the secular perspective, and
yeah,
you're like, yeah, it does make sense, because Paul didn't make it up. Paul didn't make up Christianity.
Well, rarely do lies change the world.
Yeah.
Like, you can't actually imagine I don't think you can actually invent a lie powerful enough to long-term change the world.
Well, right now I'm just in the middle of how Islam's impacting the world. So, you can change the world in not less than good ways with a lie.
Well, okay, that's true. All right.
Your turn.
Thanks for poking holes in my idea.
I'll go back to my corner.
I'll go back to my corner now.
Now you'll put some Dickens in my face.
Yeah. Well, I'm disappointed. I found out you like this book. So, I mean, that's not why I decided to read it, but it was a selling point. I thought you wouldn't like it. So I'm reading Hard Times. I've actually never read Hard Times. I've read excerpts of Hard Times, but I've never actually read Hard Times cover to cover. But, it starts off, what do you call it? James Taylor's book, Poetic Knowledge. Mm-hmm. And then I've since then seen actually a number of classical education type books. They refer to Professor Gradgrind, who's one of the main characters, as like, this is what you don't do. Mm-hmm. But it's been fun to get more context than just the first couple of chapters, which is usually what they're referring to, or at least what James Taylor was referring to. So I was just going to read a quick little section from further in. I mean, it's not even halfway, but it's the very beginning of chapter 8, because usually what's quoted is this whole where he's like pacing in his classroom and he's like, facts. We love facts. And so it's interesting how it's developed later on, because it feels so hauntingly familiar in some ways. Though, of course, in general, the way Americans approach education, it's never this as obvious as it is in this book, but I still think it has a similar effect sometimes. So anyway, I'll just read it. Let us strike the keynote again before pursuing the tune. When she was half a dozen years younger, Louisa had been overheard to begin a conversation with her brother one day by saying, "Tom, I wonder." Upon which Mr. Gradgrind, who was the person overhearing, stepped forth into the light and said, "Louisa, never wonder." Herein lay the spring of the mechanical art and mystery of educating the reason without stooping to the cultivation of the sentiments and the affections. Never wonder. By means of addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, settle everything somehow, and never wonder. Bring to me, says Machokum Child, yonder baby just able to walk, and I will engage that it shall never wonder. So then it goes down a little bit later and it talks about, the effect of this approach to education on the town. And by the time you get to the end, it's like everybody has agreed that they never were to wonder. But Mr. Gradgrind is disturbed by the few holdouts who go to the library and check out random books that do not meet with his approval. So apparently those people still wonder. I enjoyed that, especially because of the connection between wonder and the cultivation of the affections.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was an interesting connection that Dickens, he just kind of throws it out, and I'm like, man, he was so perceptive in so many ways. So far, so good. And Mr. Gradgrind really is as unbearable as you would expect from the small parts that you've heard quoted elsewhere. So I'm enjoying it. I think I'm probably going to use it in my talk for the School A Sisters retreat this year. So anyway.
And it's short, so anyone can read it. Just pick it up.
Yeah, I was actually surprised at how short it was for Dickens, because I've read a number of Dickens and they're quite the commitment. And I ordered Hard Times and Pride and Prejudice. Somehow I ended up not actually owning my own copy of Pride and Prejudice. And so I was like, this needs to be remedied. So I ordered both of them at the same time. And I was shocked that the books were almost identical in size, because I had never actually had a copy of Hard Times and was not aware that it was not, as big as some of the other ones. So Renee, let's go next.
Yeah, my School A pick was actually research for the podcast, so I'm kind of cheating. But
all right.
I was reading Lewis's On the Reading of Old Books, which is a short essay that he wrote for an introduction to a theological treatise by Athanasius. And so he's pleading with the readers to read old books, obviously. And he takes his introduction and uses it to encourage everyone to constantly read old books, and says we should read one for every modern book we read, and has this little, if you can't bear it, then you should at least read one for every 3 modern books.
I love that.
Yes. And he says just some really great things about the great conversation. And if you want to enter a conversation that's been going on without reading old books, it's like jumping into a conversation 3 hours late, and you miss all the inside jokes and the side glances that are in reference to something that happened 3 hours before you entered the conversation. And so another one of his reasons was that contemporary writers share their own contemporary outlook, even though we don't realize it, that everyone who is modern is faulty to have certain truths and certain mistakes that are the same. And so if we go outside of our own age, they're not prone to make the exact same mistakes. They have their own mistakes. So our mistakes can correct theirs. Like when we look back, we think, what were they thinking when they said that? And then we can read them and think, what are we thinking when we said this? So I have an excerpt from the beginning of his essay because he's just such a good writer.
Can I ask you a question really quick?
Yes, go.
I'm trying to remember. It's been a while since I've read that. What is his definition of old? Because I remember when I read it, I thought, oh, this is older than I thought old was.
So he doesn't give a definition, but he mentions Augustine, Aquinas, and then all the way up to, not that old for him. So I think he's just saying cover it all.
Okay. I think I remembered thinking that I really needed to go back maybe older than 100 years to really qualify in his. I read old books, but then I'm like, but they actually were written like in the early 1900s. They're not really that old. You know what I mean?
Right. So he was a medieval scholar. So obviously that's probably the bulk of what he's talking about. But he does mention Plato and some other ancients. Okay. So he begins, there's a strange idea abroad that in every subject, the ancient books should be read only by the professionals, and that the amateur should content himself with the modern books. Thus, I have found as a tutor in English literature that if the average student wants to find out something about Platonism, the very last thing he thinks of doing is to take a translation of Plato off the library shelf and read the Symposium. He would rather read some dreary modern book 10 times as long, all about isms and influences, and only once every 12 pages telling him what Plato actually said. The error is rather an amiable one, for it springs from humility. The student is half afraid to meet one of the great philosophers face to face. He feels himself inadequate and thinks he will not understand him. But if he only knew the great man, just because of his greatness, is much more intelligible than his modern commentator, he would read him. The simplest student will be able to understand, if not all, yet a very great deal of what Plato said. But hardly anyone can understand some modern books on Platonism. It has therefore been one of my main endeavors as a teacher to persuade the young that first-hand knowledge is not only more worth acquiring than second-hand knowledge, but is usually much easier and more delightful to acquire.
Amen.
This is so true.
It's so true. And I've been shocked at the first times I've picked up Plato and Aristotle, how accessible they are.
Oh, yeah. I'm trying to remember the first time I read Plato. I think it might have been when I read Euthyphro, but I'm not sure. But I just remember picking it up and being like, hold on, this is like a storybook. This isn't hard to read at all. I just had it built it up in my mind that it was going to be this big, complex thing because of exactly what Lewis said. I was reading people who were commentating on things and it just sounded so, above me.
Too many isms.
For sure.
Well, like when this book, having, just read Plato for this was actually my first cover to cover Plato that I've ever read. And, when it arrived in the mail, I was like, this is just a little book.
Right? Well, then you find out half of it's introduction and notes.
Even so, yeah. The ancients knew about brevity.
Amen. That's the truth. We could take a few lessons from them, I think, which is what we're going to do today. Perfect transition, if I do say myself. Okay, so really quickly to catch everybody up for what this topical discussion is about. We did an episode, I think it was last spring in season 8, and it was called Someone Stole My Socrates. And I will link that in the show notes so that if anybody wants to go back and listen to it, they can find it. I don't remember the number offhand. And after that episode, we had a number of emails and comments come in different places, and so many questions were asked. And a lot of them were about how to have a Socratic discussion, or when to have a Socratic discussion, or if you should have a Socratic discussion. And so we thought that a good place to start would be just to read Socrates. And then we realized that Renee here she's a homeschool mom, but she also was in the process of being classically educated. So Renee, really quickly, what degree are you pursuing? What are you doing? Explain yourself.
So I am working on my graduate degree through New St. Andrews College in classical Christian studies. And their idea is to give you the classical education you didn't have so that you can hopefully get a little closer to classically educating the next generation.
Nice.
Okay, so what we're doing today is we're eating the crumbs off of Renee's amazing table.
And actually reading some Plato and some Socratic dialogues instead of about Socratic dialogues, which is what we did last time.
Exactly. So Renee picked, I keep calling it gorgeous.
I know.
I'm like, Plato is so gorgeous, but I think it's actually Gorgias.
I think the phrase "it's all Greek" came from people trying to pronounce Greek.
Oh, probably.
I was sure to butcher every Greek name, no matter what, in all of my classes.
Yeah, for sure. I'm sure. My son is pretty good at Koine now, and even he, with some of the ancient Greek terms, was like, "I'm not 100% sure on this, Mom." Okay, so Renee picked Gorgias, had us read it. We've all three read it. But we're not going to discuss it in the sense of, the discussion's really about rhetoric and how you should use it. And so we're not really going to discuss Plato and or Socrates' view of rhetoric. What we're going to do is we're going to back up and we're going to go totally meta with this. And we're going to talk about Socratic discussion, basically from having read one, what are the distinctives that we can see? Obviously, it's just in this one book. There's probably more we could gather if we read more books. But what are the distinctives of a Socratic discussion that we draw from this text? Really, what we'll just do, ladies, is start building our own little list as we go along. I'm literally going to type it as we're going, and then we'll put it into the show notes. With that said, if you want to go first, whoever you are, feel free.
I'll go first.
Okay.
So he starts off. This is a dialogue. So he comes into a room, Socrates, and there's quite a few people, and there is a Sophist teacher, Gorgias, and he asks Gorgias, will you have a conversation with me? Are you willing to put aside your skill as an orator and not have long speeches, but do question and answer, carry on a conversation? So that's his interest.
So he invites him, really,
to a discussion.
to a discussion.
That's based on short questions and answers.
And actually answering the questions that he asks. I think that's one of the first things. He says, well, I'm not going to talk to this other guy, Polus. Gorgias says, well, why is that? He doesn't really seem to me to be answering the question.
So short questions and answers. I mean, that actually is really interesting. Do you think it's significant that he invites him rather than just starting the discussion and seeing if he'll take?
I think it's really significant because in a lot of places, he says that the goal is to refine each other against themselves. And so you have to have willing parties on both hands to reach the truth, which is their goal.
So I'm thinking of this in two terms. What actually happened? And then if we were going to duplicate the process, what would that look like for us? Just because people say, you know, this is one of the ways that you would classically educate is to have a Socratic discussion. Now we could debate that at the end, but if we were to try to do that, it seems like it is kind of formal. At least in this case, he's actually set up some parameters at the outset.
Yeah, and he does that with whenever he changes, because he actually has a conversation with 3 different people throughout the course of the book. And each time the person he's talking to changes, he does start by giving parameters or asking them, are they willing? Basically, you know, are they coming at this willing to be honest was his emphasis with one of them.
Yeah. So honesty. Do you think it's significant that they have an audience?
Well, considering that we're reading a book, I think it is. I think we can look at this and say, who is actually the student that Plato intended to have? Is it Gorgias? And we can definitively say no, because this was written after they were dead. So the student is the reader of the book.
Well, for Plato, that's true. But Socrates, when he's talking, I forget now if it's Polus or is it Callicles? How are we going to say that?
Sure, Callicles. That sounds
Callicles,
good to me.
I think.
We've all voted. That's how you say it.
One of them brings up, well, get anyone else to agree. So there is an audience and he refers to them. And Socrates comes back and says, I don't care about what everyone thinks. I'm having a conversation with just you. And we need to come to this just you and me. So it's a one-on. Socrates is coming at it with a one-on-one conversation. There are others listening, but he's only speaking to one person.
Okay, that's interesting to me because I was going back and forth about this because the audience seems significant in this particular dialogue. But when I read Euthyphro, if I remember correctly, it's just a private conversation between him and Euthyphro. Like there's nobody else there. It's like on the steps of a courthouse or something. I know that's not the one that we read, but I was kind of, mentally comparing the differences and the similarities between the two to try to figure out like what is really imperative in a Socratic discussion. And there was not an audience there, but I hadn't thought about how even though there was an audience in this one, you're right, his focus is on the individual.
He says quite a few times that he only cares to convince the interlocutor, the person he's talking to. So we have that. The narrow focus is the immediate person. But the fact that these are written down and recorded tells you that there are other people that he's trying to reach on top of it. So I think in that sense, the audience is significant.
Right.
Even though they're only listening in, it might be something similar to our children listening in on a good conversation. Not that they're there to take part of it, but they are there to learn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
So that's what we are today. We're the children listening in on the conversation when we read Gorgias. Oh, that's interesting. And the one I was thinking about was the good humor, which I know, Misty, you brought up in one of your, was that a Spotlight article that you wrote?
Yeah.
For the newsletter? Okay. I noticed that you brought that up, but it was so true. I was just laughing. Sometimes I was thinking, is Socrates being disingenuous? Is he being sarcastic? Or is he for real? Because he's just kind of this hapless, like, well, I don't really know anything. And so there were times that, but I mean, sometimes he just really can make a dig at the person he's talking to, or at, rhetoricians or whatever. I don't know. He just was so funny. So the good humor is probably super important. Come to think of it, in Norms and Nobility, that's one of the things that David Hicks points out about Socrates, is that he has this sense of good humor, that he has what does he say? He says something about Socrates painted a wry smile on the face of classical education, which I totally see. But I was thinking too, when you're having a conversation like this and the person you're talking to keeps showing you how wrong you are, right? This happened to me earlier in this recording. It can be so discouraging. No, just kidding. I wasn't discouraged. But I'm thinking, like, especially if you're a young person and think you know so much, and then you start to find out that you don't, and how discouraging, or you can just get defensive, and it feels like the good humor kind of diffuses the situation a little bit.
He does stay really lighthearted. Socrates never does seem to get shaken by the people he's talking to certainly get upset.
Right.
But
That's true.
He never does, although he does engage in making fun of them when the opportunity arises.
Do you think Socrates is impervious?
I was going to use the word impervious. Yes.
I vote yes.
Because all these people are getting upset. They're calling him infuriating, annoying, and all of that. And he's, call me what you want. Let's just keep going. That's what I need to be like with the math lesson. Whatever. I don't care if you like math or not. Let's just keep going.
So that was good humor. What else do we see? I actually had a place where Socrates did give some guidelines on asking questions, or some lessons, I guess I would say, on asking questions. This is on page 29. I think we all have the same version of the book. In the show notes will be linked. Speaking of this book, I accidentally bought 2 copies. Renee told us which one to buy, and I bought it. And then I forgot that I bought it. and Misty needed a copy. So I was like, I'll order one for her and one for me at the same time. So I ordered them. And then I was reading one, I don't know which one it was, and I had written notes in it. And I pick up another copy some other day. And I was like, where did all my notes go? Oh my gosh. I was like, I know I wrote notes in here. I know I had. Anyway, I had bought 2 copies of the book. So we're going to do a giveaway. I'm going to have Abby set that up. I think she's going to do it inside Sistership. So we're giving away a copy of Gorgias shortly after this comes out.
Be in Sistership to find out more.
There you go. So on page 29, Socrates gives some lessons on asking questions. Well, I'm just going to read the whole thing and see if I can figure out why I underlined this. So at this point, he's talking to Polus. So he has transferred audience members from one to another, which this keeps happening. For people who haven't read this, it's like someone gets so frustrated they don't want to talk to him anymore. So he pulls up someone else from the audience and keeps going. So it's one continuous conversation for him, but he has multiple victims as he goes along.
Until they all tell him, no one's talking to you anymore, just talk. We're not answering.
Hilarious. By the end, he's asking and answering questions by himself because nobody wants to talk to him. I'm like, by the end, we have these Callicles is like, you're right. Obviously, yes, like everything's a one-word answer because he's so ticked off.
Whatever you say, Socrates.
Which I was thinking, so then when we're talking to angry teenagers, we should just be undaunted.
Just kidding.
You got a one-word answer, which is more than Socrates got sometimes. So Polus says, what do you think rhetoric is then? And Socrates says something which, according to an essay of yours I recently read, is responsible for expertise. So Socrates says, I think it's a kind of experiential knack. So that's what you think rhetoric is, do you? I do, unless you tell me otherwise. A knack at what? At producing pleasure and gratification.
Well, it kind of switches at that point for this time.
Yeah.
Now Polus is giving the questions and Socrates is answering.
Right.
So Socrates isn't always only asking questions, which I have heard Socratic discussion characterized that way, where Socrates never gives an answer. He only questions.
Right. And that's true. When Polus asks a question, then Socrates kind of challenges him to refine his question. So Polus says, wouldn't you say that the ability of rhetoric to please people is precisely what makes it so admirable? And Socrates says, Polus, surely it's a secondary question, whether I think rhetoric is admirable. You can only ask me that once you found out from me what I think rhetoric is. As his student, if for lack of a better term, I think Polus is his student, functionally his student at this point. As his student asks him a question, he tells him, no, that's a secondary issue. You need to ask me that. So he's actually coaching him on having a better discussion and asking the right questions. And I thought that was really interesting, that he took the chance to actually help Polus. I mean, it seems like the whole thing really is he's helping you think through something really well. And he's teaching you the steps of thinking through something really well. But even here, he didn't just answer how do I put this? I think for us, the instinct is to answer a question a student gives us because they've asked a question. They've raised the question, so we should answer it. But Socrates didn't just do that. He actually said, no, that's not what you want to be asking. What you really should be asking. Anyway, it was interesting to me that he's coaching the process of thinking, even by coaching him on refining his questions.
And he's doing it by insisting on precision and staying on topic.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So the conversation is not allowed to drift away from their very first thing, which is what is rhetoric, and coming up with a definition of that. And anytime Polus shifts it and says, well, what about this? Or what do you think? He just keeps on narrowing down to let's answer the first thing in order and then we can move on.
Mm-hmm. And it starts by figuring out the definition. These words that we use, what do we mean by them?
Yeah, he does that a lot in this book. What does good mean? What does morality mean?
Happiness.
Getting into, the heart of what these words mean. And before you can move on, you have to agree on the meaning of the word itself.
Well, and isn't that the truth? I mean, isn't it frustrating when feel like you're having a good discussion with someone and then they equivocate on a term? And you're like, hold on, we were talking about this with this definition and now all of a sudden it means something else. But actually, in most conversations, we don't lay out definitions in the beginning. We assume that we have a common definition and then just get annoyed when we find out that we don't. But it almost seems to me that Socrates is coming in assuming we probably don't all have a shared definition. Mm-hmm. And that's why he starts there, which I think is an interesting approach, because I think it's often presented that this lack of common meaning is a modern problem because we don't believe in truth. I don't see how we can get away from the idea that actually it's just a human problem, and that's why Socrates is approaching it this way.
I think the modern problem is that we would refuse to get to an agreed upon definition.
Okay, that would make sense.
You're allowed to have here's my definition, there's your definition, and that's why we can't talk about it. Like, until we agree on a definition, we can't get any farther.
Okay.
I think, too, we have really lost a sense of the importance of words in general.
Yeah.
We don't have the same kind of reverence for language. They're in a time when there's very little written, and the skill of oration is such a big thing, and it matters down to the word. What you say and how you say it is a really big thing. And so even in that context, he's insisting on keeping it on track to people who are used to words really mattering. So for us, I think that's even amplified, that the words do matter. And we need to make sure that our definitions are the same and that we stay on that track and care about the words that we're using and not exchange words for other words that don't mean the same thing.
Mm. I don't know how many times I've been in or just listened to discussion, conversation, argument where the two people, whether it's me and someone else or just listening to two people, they probably actually agree more than they disagree. But the problem is that they didn't define terms. So they're using words and they both actually mean something different by those terms.
Yes.
And so we just start with definitions.
I've seen that with book reviews where someone writes a scathing review of a book, but they've decided they really like their definition of a certain term that the book is about. And they're actually attacking something the author didn't even say.
Yeah.
Because the author is using a different, often a more refined definition of something, and they're attacking this other definition of the same word.
So I'm reading this really great book on academic writing that was assigned for my class that I have loved, and it was really great how well it paired with Socratic discussion. It's called They Say, I Say by Gerald Graff. And they talk about the art of summarizing. And they say there's two things. One is you have to be willing to suspend your disbelief and actually enter into what the other person is saying without your own presuppositions. And then they say when you enter into a conversation with others in your writing, then it's extremely important that you go back to what those others have said, that you study it very closely, and that you not confuse it with something you already believe. A writer who fails to do this ends up essentially conversing with imaginary others who are really only the product of his or her own biases and preconceptions.
Oh my gosh. I could send you a couple book review links that fall into this category. Okay. I have another distinctive. You guys ready?
Go for it.
Comes from page 81. This is Socrates speaking, right? Yes, it is. Okay. It does clarify the evidence, which I'd like to use to persuade you, if I possibly can, to change your mind. Oh, and then he says what he's going to change it to. But he says it in multiple places. Well, I'm going to ask you these questions so that I can change your mind. I thought it was interesting to lay that out because I feel like I'm always a little underhanded by comparison. Like, I'm going to ask you these innocent questions so that I can change your mind, but I'm not going to tell you I'm trying to change your mind. I'm just going to hope it happens. And Socrates is just in your face. So at this point, my whole goal in talking to you is to change your mind. He just laid it out there.
Yeah, he's talking to Callicles here, who is morally repugnant. So
that is true.
He's obviously got the upper hand on what is truth and what is right. And after walking through some of the things that they walk through, he does drop any pretense of let's seek the truth together. And he's pretty sure here correctly that he has the truth. And so he does just lay it all out. Let's change your corrupt mind to something better.
Which a few pages later, Callicles says, all these futile little questions are typical of the way Socrates tries to prove people wrong. Sorry. Then a few lines later, he's like, ask your lovely little question, Socrates. It really is like talking to an angry teenager. I should be careful. I don't have angry teenagers in my house, but I remember acting like one a few times. And so I'm seeing myself, not really my children, in their defense. Okay. So after he, meaning Socrates, after they've developed some of these definitions, then I've noticed he works from their places of agreement. So like on page 94, he says, okay, I'll try to explain myself better. You and I have already agreed. And then he lists the things they've already agreed on. And so now he's going to build on that. And I thought, well, that's an important approach, that he's reminding them, we agreed on this. So you're not allowed to equivocate on this, right? Because we agreed on this. And then he's building on that foundation of agreement.
So in another dialogue, Socrates quotes Homer, and he says there, when advancing in tandem, one perceives before the other. And this, they're getting back to, let's refine each other for the sake of getting to truth and gaining morality. Let's be better people through this dialogue. And so this idea that two are better than one is that we get an idea and we hold on to it, but our ideas need the refinement of conversation. And so when we talk with someone else, we refine the idea down to the truth, and that makes you a better person when you have the truth. Mm-hmm. And so it is always for the sake of gaining truth, which is living a better life when you have more of the truth.
On page 70, Socrates also lists out 3 qualities that are needed if these conversations are going to be productive.
Ooh, okay.
He said, Socrates. So this is with Callicles, our morally reprehensible character.
Oh, I was going to say our hero.
He says, what's the point of this question of yours, Socrates? He's just he has animosity the whole time through.
He sure does.
He's got an attitude problem. Socrates said, I'll tell you, I think in meeting you, I've met with just such a godsend.
Praise God we met.
Why? If you confirm the beliefs I have in my mind, then I can be sure these beliefs are true. Because it occurs to me that for anyone to be able to test whether or not a person's life is as it should be, he has to have 3 qualities. These are knowledge, affection, and candor. And you have the complete set. I come across a lot of people, you see, who can't test me because they don't have your knowledge. And then there's another lot who are knowledgeable enough but refuse to tell me the truth because they don't care for me as you do. And then there are our 2 visitors here, Gorgias and Polus, who have the knowledge and are fond of me, but are too easily embarrassed to speak their minds. It's indisputable, surely, that they're riddled with inhibitions. Their sense of propriety is so acute that they had the gall to contradict themselves in front of a large number of witnesses. There you have the audience is apparently important there. And to do so on the most important matters in the world. You're the only one with the complete set of qualities. So he is educated. He cares about Socrates, is what Socrates is saying, although I'm not sure that's really borne out by Callicles' attitude. And Callicles doesn't care about other people's opinion of him so much as his own opinion.
His own opinion of him. Just quite high.
So there's a little bit of Socrates, flattering him and turning these qualities to his advantage for the conversation.
And Socrates does want to be proven wrong. He has the spot where he says, prove me wrong and free me from the snares of absurdity. So if his highest goal is to have any wrong taken out of him, and Callicles
would be the one
has so little scruples that he would not feel embarrassed to state his
do so
true
gladly.
Opinion. Right. Then I guess it could be a mode of caring for Socrates that he's willing to engage in the conversation to any end.
Right. Well, and in that, Socrates is also, in a way, modeling what a student or someone engaged in these conversations should actually want. He's like saying, this is what I want. But in saying that, you kind of have to ask and answer for yourself also.
Mm-hmm. Well, be willing to be put on the line and be wrong.
Mm-hmm. Is that what I want?
And we have the other guys who are so embarrassed that they couldn't continue with their point.
Right.
So we don't want to be that person.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm looking at our list of distinctives. It's getting quite long. The one thing I see lacking in it is, did Socrates did he know where he was going to end up? Did he actually intend the whole conversation the way that it happened? Do you think? I know he wanted to do general things like establish definitions and then find truth and kind of solve the issue at hand. But do you think he actually went in with a specific goal in mind? And then he drove the whole thing to that goal?
I think he did for himself, but did he have anyone persuaded to his way of thinking? That answer might be no.
Which, brings me back to the audience idea, because I was listening to someone talking the other day that was saying something about, you're not having this conversation for the sake of the person you're talking to. That person's not going to be convinced. You're having this conversation for the people who are overhearing it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because they're actually the ones that have the open mind to, like, they're trying to, who's right? Usually they haven't gone into it with preconceived notions about who was right. They're trying to decide all along. So they're the ones with the open mind, which means eventually they are the student and not actually the person you're talking to.
Right. And we have Polus, who assumes that the purpose of this dialectical conversation is to assert himself at the expense of Socrates. He just wants victory. And the interaction in the discourse is completely competitive. And the ending is the triumph. That would be his victory. And in this type of conversation, there's no place for mutual growth or learning, but Socrates' ultimate goal is to reach true knowledge. So he repeats over and over how happy he will be to change his mind. So maybe he refines his own understanding, Socrates. I don't think he convinces anybody to move to his side. So the people who can learn from it then become the audience and the reader.
Mm. So I feel like we have a pretty good list. Is there anything we want to add before we go to my next level questions that I have for you guys? Any big thing you think we've left out? I mean, I know we can't even get every distinctive of a Socratic discussion from reading one dialogue, but I'm just wondering, is there anything big from this one where we've left out, you think?
I thought it really was interesting near the end where Callicles has given up. But it's like the argument has gone around in circles a little bit. Like it gets somewhere and then it has to backtrack. And then it gets a little bit farther and there has to backtrack. It hasn't really come to completion. Mm-hmm. And yet Socrates loses conversation partners. But even though he's lost the partners, he says, still, he's about to say, well, I guess I have to go home now. And Gorgias says, I don't think we ought to go home yet. I'd like you to complete the argument. And I get the impression everyone else wants you to as well. In fact, for my part, I'd like to hear you round the argument off by yourself. Mm. So even though he was beaten, people are tired of answering his questions. Still, there's this curiosity in the audience and even in the people who have not answered the way that they had hoped or didn't get out of the conversation what they want. There was still curiosity and still a desire to hear the whole. So he wasn't just, he might have made a few enemies, but that wasn't what was happening for all the hearers.
Yeah.
There was curiosity there also. Mm. He wasn't only infuriating everybody.
Right. Some people were at the very least entertained. Though I would say it's more than that. If they want a conclusion, it's more than just entertainment. Mm-hmm. They want resolution, I guess.
Yeah. And Socrates was able to give the resolution as well.
Okay. So you care if we go to the next level?
Go to the next level.
Okay. I'm going to read our list so we just remember everything we've said. We talked about the discussion starting with an invitation to have a discussion, characterized by short questions and answers. Honesty is required. The audience is listening, but Socrates focuses on teaching the individual he's actually talking to. He focuses on the immediate person, but possibly the conversation is for the sake of the audience, and the audience remains curious to the end and desires resolution. Socrates has good humor. The conversation is precise. It stays on topic. It starts with definitions. Its goal is to change his student's mind. It builds on the foundation of agreement after those definitions are established. Its purpose is to gain truth. The requirements of the participants are that they have three things: knowledge, affection, and candor. Socrates is directing the conversation, but he is willing to be proven wrong. He even wants to be proven wrong. He has a goal in mind, and apparently his goal drives that whole conversation, which might be how it stays on topic, because he has a goal, I would say. And then finally, Socrates is able to resolve the debate alone when necessary. There's a lot of talk, I think, about having a Socratic discussion be part of the classical education you give your children. The next level that I wanted to go to is something along the lines of, if someone was to try to have let me back up a little bit. It seems to me, and you guys can tell me if I'm wrong, that we could have a homeschool that is teeming with good discussions, but it was never actually a Socratic discussion. Because even though it was a good discussion, you might have honesty and affection and maybe even knowledge if it's an older student, but you wouldn't necessarily have it where the teacher went into the room with a goal and everything was driven. You know what I mean? It would be more like the unruly spaghetti type of discussions that are just good discussions. I don't think every single thing on our list is imperative, but my question is, in what context would we use this, if at all? I think that's my first question. Yes. Okay. With conviction now. In what context? If we were going to try to do this, in what context would we do it?
Well, the goal here is to come to knowledge. So it's not just to discuss and share your thoughts, which is what a lot of our conversation discussion can be.
Yeah.
But the context around it is either a disagreement or there not being understanding. And so you're having a conversation instead of just giving them the fact or the information. You're kind of going through this journey of questioning what you do know to come to realize that you can figure out what was lacking or come closer to truth.
And I think the what you do know part is really important because that does set an age limit to an extent for us, that both parties are coming into this with some good knowledge. I think I would refine, you had written that the goal was to change a student's mind. I think I would refine that to maybe correct any wrong thinking, because it's not necessarily to change his mind, but if there is a lack of truth, then it would be to correct that.
Okay.
So that you can come to the truth together. So you've got some and I've got some, and let's bring these together and match them up against each other and refine them.
Right. Socrates sees in these conversation partners that they have wrong premises. And it's almost like he gets them to self-contradict in order to prove that their premises are wrong.
Yeah.
He also has the skill to survey their thinking and get to the wrong thing and lead it out by little steps of question. He's really skilled at that. So in that sense, I think to have a true Socratic discussion, there would need to be some building of these conversational skills that are not modern skills that we have down very well.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I do wonder about the knowledge part. I mean, almost would have to be like late high school. Like, I don't know when you would get to enough knowledge, not that you can't have a good conversation with a 6-year-old, because you can, but to actually have this kind of a discussion, it just seems like it would almost have to be late high school at the earliest to have enough.
Well, I think it depends on what that goal is or what the truth is, because, sometimes
it could be a simpler thing, you think?
Yeah, a 6 or a 7-year-old will ask you a question and they could actually figure out the answer to that. So you show them where to start by asking them a question that they know the answer to and kind of guide them through. I'm trying to think of a good example, but my young children have asked kind of deep theological questions out of the blue, and instead of giving just an answer flat out, you can show them how to think about their questions in this way.
And maybe you even know that they have the answer in there.
Right.
I'm thinking of when my kids ask something maybe about sin or man's inherent goodness, I can ask them, well, have you ever done something that you didn't maybe mean to do, like lashed out? And was that just in your heart? Are we inherently sinful? And you know that they know the answers to them if you just can get them to look at their own behavior and actions.
Okay, so when we're doing that, maybe we are having like baby Socratic discussion. It doesn't go on for pages and pages, but it is still following that general model because it does even have a goal.
Right.
They asked something and you're driving towards a specific goal. You're not wandering all over the place. You're staying on topic and trying to build one thing upon another. And if you think they do know and they just aren't thinking about it properly or whatever, because one of the reasons why I think knowledge is a requirement is because there seems to be this underlying principle of recollection going on, that you're trying to get them to collect the things that they know together in order to come to truth. They have what they need in the bank. They just don't know how to write the check or something.
Yeah. I even think an example is when I've been helping, 5th, 6th grade kids with math. And, there's always the struggle with fractions, always fractions. And so now I get some of that attitude back as soon as it's like, okay, I'm not the only one. It's a thing with Socratic discussion. But they say, Mom, I need help. And what the child really wants is for me to write down the exact arithmetic that they know they can solve. They don't want to think through how to get the answer. They think, and I thought this at their age as well, I'm just supposed to do the math. I don't know what math to do. So tell me what math to do and I'll do the math. It's like, no,
right.
You have to be able to think about it. And so the first question now that I always ask is, what is a fraction? Well, let's think about it. What is a fraction? And that's where we start.
Yeah, that's not annoying at all.
That's where we start every time. And they need the repetition.
Yeah.
Until they get to the point where, Mom, can you help me? I know that a fraction is a division problem. Fraction is dividing. And the answer is less than 1. And you can figure out word problems that way much, much faster, or other, percentages. And so the questions of definitions, anytime you have to help the student think through something, this is a way to help them learn how to think for themselves.
In that regard, I think that we do have this type of conversation often, because we know it's better to draw out what's in them and make them think than to give them an answer that they're not going to remember if they don't have to mull it over.
I was thinking about just the topic. So the topic is about rhetoric, and it really is, it's a moral topic, because it's, what is its purpose and how should it be used? And these are moral questions. And if I'm correct, the only other dialogue I've read is Euthyphro, and it too is a discussion of morality, like a balancing of your duty toward your parents with your duty towards the state or towards justice. Mm-hmm. And so I haven't read all the Socratic dialogues I could read, but I do find it interesting that the two I've read were dealing with moral questions. And I'm wondering the reason why I'm wondering is because Charlotte Mason talked about Socratic discussion having a moral purpose, and that we would use it with our students when we were having a moral discussion, that it wouldn't be something that we used generally. And I haven't thought about it enough to know for sure if I completely agree with her, especially because your math thing makes perfect sense, Misty. But I'm just wondering, do we know if it always dealt with a moral topic? Like, would that be on our list of distinctives? Was it always covering a moral topic? Do we know? I'm mainly asking Renee, because I feel like you've probably read more of these than we have.
I think you'd have to read all the dialogues to answer that question with 100% certainty, which I haven't. But we do know that Plato's a philosopher.
Okay.
And I think we can say that any discussion that you get into that is on a deeper level is going to take you to morals and ethics at some point. So in that regard, if you're seeking truth,
right?
So those are always going to be tied together, whether it's math or
truth is a moral question, which our secular, modern, mindset forgets or tries to deny. And Socrates was quick to go there. It seemed like even in Gorgias, the people he was talking to didn't think that it was a moral or philosophical discussion, really.
Yeah, they thought it was just a simple answer.
Yeah, Socrates drove the conversation that direction very quickly. And part of that is proving that it matters. Truth matters.
I had a quote from the very end. He says, will you be persuaded by me? You should join me on the road to a place which our discussion suggests holds happiness for you, not only during your lifetime, but after your death as well. Let people despise you and abuse you as an idiot if they like. Yes, let them even strike you in the face. Why should that worry you? Nothing terrible will happen to you as long as you are a good and moral person, training yourself in the exercise of virtue. Once we've completed our training together in this respect, then and only then will we turn to public life, if that seems appropriate. And he says it's because by then we'll have better ideas to contribute than we do at the moment. So the point is to get to what's right thinking and truth, and then we can go and contribute to society because we're holding the truth.
I really want us to try to connect this to what we're actually doing in our homeschools. Is this appropriate? And if it is appropriate as a tool for us, then to kind of re-ask the question initially and just try to get you to give me more depth on this. When would we really use this? Is this the kind of tool that we just keep and use in a serendipitous opportunity that arises? Or do you think it's appropriate to actually plan having a conversation? I don't know. I cannot know Socrates' mind. I cannot know if he walked up with the intent to have this conversation or it just kind of happened. But is this the kind of thing we would plan? Or is this the kind of thing we would just use when opportunity arose?
I think this is a method that can be used for seeking truth in our homeschool, especially with our older age students, knowing that they're going to be going out into a world that would like to claim that there is no version of absolute truth. And we can take everything that they are learning and inquire deeper into it. So we can take pagan literature, we can take anything that they're learning and inquire into the truth of it. What is the real truth? And unlike Socrates, we know the truth. So we are one up in that regard, that we can bring it back to the absolute truth and use it, I think, to equip our students to walk in a world that doesn't know the truth.
So you think this is pretty important then? I mean, that's what I'm hearing from you.
I do. Yeah. I think conversation and seeking of truth is extremely important, and giving our kids the ability to get there and to know what questions to ask to get you to the truth and not get sidetracked. There's that part in there where he talks about the group speak, like Callicles or one of them says, well, I can get this whole audience to agree with me. And Socrates says, what does it matter if everyone agrees with you if you're agreeing on the wrong thing? And we see that today in social media is so prevalent that if you've got a group behind you, you must be right. So we want to equip our children to say, regardless of what the group says, what is the truth and what is right?
Right. And that means learning how to ask these questions and come to truths, not repeat our own different group think, like not replace one group think with another. But if you have grown up with this approach or had this approach done to you,
even if
you can go, you can go then you're equipped to go do that to others, and to not be scared if someone gives you a premise that you think is wrong. It's not just your premise against their premise. You can ask them a question, and you can keep asking leading questions because truth will out. And so you're not afraid to have a conversation with falsehood.
Yeah. So maybe our goal is to do this with our children so that they in turn learn to do it in all the aspects that they need to find the truth.
What if I'm listening to this? I have never read a Socratic discussion, and I feel like I don't trust myself to be able to drive a whole conversation towards a goal like this. I mean, what do you think I should do? Should I just hope that my child gets these skills somewhere else? Or are there specific steps you think I could take to better equip myself for doing something like this long term?
Lewis would unequivocally say, you better start reading Plato. Read old books.
And that Plato is not as intimidating to read, actually. This was a fun read, really.
It really was.
Yes.
I was even thinking reading, I was going to get a few more dialogues and consider next year reading them almost like a play with my middle and high school kid. Like, here, you be this person, I'll be this person, and we're going to read it out loud together as if we are these, like a dialogue.
They are fun, and they're far more accessible than I had initially thought that they would be. I was pleasantly surprised by everything that I've read.
Yeah.
And I don't think we have to say this is the only method. Your child's not going to be equipped to find the truth, or you're not doing it right if you can't use Socratic dialogue. It's maybe a tool and a fun tool to have, but not the only tool that everyone has to use.
Yeah.
And I do think it could be overdone. I think if I approached my student like this every day, I would find
every single time they were wrong.
Right. Like how by the end of this one conversation, all of Socrates, everyone's refusing to engage with him, right? And so I could see how I could like single-handedly destroy my homeschool if I just decided I'm going to be Socrates to my students.
They might force you to drink poison.
Right? Exactly. Yeah. And that's when my kids started to grow hemlock in the garden.
Yeah.
I have watched one of my children talking with someone who is not a Christian, and my student's a Christian, but then beyond that also has different politics and different things. And so I've been watching this child of mine try to engage. And I think even trying to take somewhat of a Socratic approach, trying to lead the conversation toward a goal and asking questions that definitely would be characterized as leading. And then it's so funny because not being successful, like not somehow the conversation gets out of his control. Sometimes I think it is staying on topic. Like he's not able to keep this person on topic. But anyway, it's just been really interesting to watch him trying to do some of this. And I thought, you know what? I've never actually had this child read Socrates. Maybe I should. Maybe it would have helped.
Another thought too is that what sanctifies us is God's word, and his word is truth. And so when our children have that, they have the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we equip them with the truth, these are tools to lead people to more truth and deeper truth. And they can be really useful in working out truth, like deeper theological issues or leading someone to Christ. But they have the truth, and that is what is the most important thing.
Yeah. We aren't going to find the truth through Socratic discussion.
Right.
Alone.
Right. Well, and I think maybe that comes back to the knowledge requirement for conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Because these are moral conversations, then that means that the scriptural knowledge, I mean, you may need other kinds of knowledge in order to be fit for any particular conversation that might come up. But without the scriptural knowledge, you're not going to be fit, especially to direct the conversation.
Yeah.
Which I guess is an admonishment for us as the moms. If we're going to even attempt this, then that's the knowledge we need.
And even finding resources where you can watch it done too. You know, there are debates or different things where you can see this done and get some ideas for how to lead a conversation or have a conversation or the kind of questions to ask. Maybe not even of your kids, but to watch with your kids as an example of how to engage on politics or on atheism or whatever. Sometimes finding a really good debate is a way to get some experience with Socratic discussion.
That's a really good point. Thank you, guys. I think this is great. I'm going to try to format this list that we've built into some sort of little table. I don't know, Misty, maybe we should put it as an addition to the Scholey sheet, actually.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Like have a page 2 for this particular episode. But I was thinking about trying to put it into a table where it's like this overall is what is needed, but then this is what is needed on the part of the student, and this is what is needed on the part of the teacher. I have it in my mind. We'll see if it really comes out that way when I put it together. Seems like a good idea right now.
You better have a conversation about it. Work that out.
I'll send it to you guys for editing. Okay. Well, then I thank you both for coming.
Yeah, thanks, Renee. This was great.
Yeah, it was fun.
That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening and being a part of the sisterhood of the podcast. Make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss any of the episodes coming out this season. Every episode has a Scholey sheet, and this episode is no exception. At Scholey Sisters, we want to be people who apply what we learn rather than just listening and forgetting. Scholey sheets are individual journal pages that help you apply the ideas from the episode. Download your Scholey sheet for free from our show notes at scholeysisters.com/SS69. This week's Scholey sheet includes the chart I mentioned at the end of this episode. Want to read Gorgias for yourself? Abby will be running a giveaway of my accidental extra copy, Inside the Sistership. If you aren't already a member of the only social media network designed by classical homeschooling moms for classical homeschooling moms, go to scholeysisters.com/sistership and register. Next episode, Misty and Pam go rogue and dare to do an interview without me. I may be disgruntled that I missed out, but trust me when I say this was all for your benefit because they interviewed the one and only Andrew Pudawa. This is an episode you do not want to miss. Until then, we want to remind you once again that homeschooling is a marathon you needn't run alone, so open up your eyes and look around you. Find your sisters.
And it's the telltale Brandy microphone bumping.
I'm here.
I know the sound of that microphone bump.
Oh, man. Tried to be sneaky.
I feel like we're being serenaded from somewhere.
Yeah, the piano is never quiet at my house.